Okay, so I'll go ahead and kick us off. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rachel Chuang, and I work at the EdTech Hub. I am also honored to be your session moderator for today, and this research hour is co-hosted by EdTech Hub and mEducation Alliance, and we'll take a deep dive into research on girls' education and EdTech. I'm excited to be joined by our three panelists for today, Dr. Victor Orozco from the World Bank, Dr. Helen Crompton from Old Dominion University, and Dr. Nicola Pitchford from the University of Nottingham. During this session, each panelist will share a brief introduction about themselves and then an overview of their research. We will then move into a time of Q&A with you all, our lovely audience. So we encourage you to share your questions in the chat throughout the presentations. And then our chat monitor, Zola, and I will sift through the questions and pose them to our panelists during the second half of this research hour. So thank you everyone for typing in your introductions into the chat. I would encourage you to do that. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Victor, who will be sharing more about his research in Nigeria on movies and mobiles. Victor, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I will present results of a randomized controlled trial of a 5-day intervention that combined aspirational movies with the provision of low-cost smartphones preloaded with gamified apps and digital libraries in children's mother tongue. This study was a collaboration with edutainment producers, app developers, the Nigerian government, and World Bank colleagues. The Norwegian Development Agency, NORAD, provided important funding for rigorously testing these very innovative, high impact, and still rare interventions. My name is Victor Orozco, and I lead the World Bank's research program on edutainment, the use of entertainment media with development objectives. Next slide, please. Our program is part of the World Bank's Development Impact Evaluation Department, or DIME, which has an active research portfolio across all World Bank global practices in over 60 countries. Next, please. DIME's edutainment program works with governments, development partners, and the entertainment industry in the main regional entertainment and innovation hubs. Next, please. As motivation for today's presentation, most people would agree that for home learning to work, parents and students need to be motivated and for learning materials to be available at home. However, home learning faces many challenges in the real world. Next. In northern Nigeria, where our study takes place, less than 10% of parents read to their children and less than 50% of children attend primary school. Over a third of girls get married before they reach 15. Students often speak a different language at home than the instruction language at school. And of course, there are also more universal issues like books being boring for most kids. Next slide, please. And next. The first generation of EdTech research showed that providing computers or laptops alone rarely improve learning outcomes. Based on this research, a recent World Bank report concluded that investing in hardware alone was a bad investment when not accompanied by complementary measures. Next. We test 2 of such measures through a cluster randomized controlled trial that included over 9,000 households in Northwest Nigeria. In all treatment communities, we invited households with 6 to 9-year-old children to attend community screenings aimed at reshaping educational and gender attitudes of parents. In half of these treatment communities, in addition, we provided smartphones preloaded with literacy games and app libraries in local languages. Next. The community screenings involved aspirational animations and documentaries produced by Impacted International, a female NGO facilitator that led post-screening discussions, and the community leader who endorsed the educational message that education, especially girl education, is in line with traditional values. The organization and delivery was in 3 days. Next. To study the additional impacts of the mobile learning add-on in treatment 2 communities, we conducted a public lottery at the end of the community screenings where only a third of attendees won a smartphone. Winners picked a device in a digital literacy session at a later date. Smartphones were preloaded with the game Feed the Monster, which teaches reading foundations, and the Global Digital Library, an app that included hundreds of early literacy books in Hausa. Multi-donor initiatives led by NORAD and USAID helped source the content, adapt, and translate these apps into over 100 languages. Now to the results. Next. Pulling both arms, we see that intervention increased parental aspirations for their daughters to attend school at 15, to remain in school by the age of 15, parents' preference for delaying their girls' marriage age as well, and it increased school attendance by 34%. While these aspirational movies drove these results, learning impacts were only observed when we provided communities with a preloaded smartphones. Next. The combined intervention, the edutainment movies and the mobiles, improved many early grade literacy skills, including listening comprehension and letter dictation. Aggregating our 10 literacy modules, we see an average increase of 0.18 standard deviations in literacy skills. Despite the intervention lacking numeracy components, we see improvements across different numeracy skills. Again, aggregating them, we observe numeracy impacts averaging 0.29 standard deviations. Next. It seems that the smartphones produce super parents as a mechanism, in the sense that parents were more likely to read to their children and to be confident in their ability to help their children to learn at home, regardless of the parent's educational level. In other words, with few parents knowing how to read in their study in the study locations, smartphones empowered them in supporting their children's home learning activities. Next. The data suggests that home learning should be an important driver of our results. In the first month, the median combined use of both apps was above 8 hours, with app use steadily increasing between the first and fourth week. Next. Our trial also shows that the combined intervention had substantial spillovers on siblings. It increased literacy and numeracy of older siblings, with impacts being slightly lower compared to the main child. Spillovers transcended learning outcomes. In treatment to communities, we see a decrease of 25% of teenage mothers. Not bad for a 5-day intervention. Next. To conclude, the movies and mobiles intervention shows that complementary measures are indeed needed for EdTech interventions to work. While aspirational movies increase parents' aspirations and school attendance, smartphones improve learning outcomes. The combined intervention also increased learning outcomes and reduced teenage pregnancies of older siblings. To address the learning crisis of developing countries, development partners should use the COVID crisis to accelerate the testing of mobile-based solutions for both offline and online populations. After all, almost half of the world's adults owns a smartphone today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. One thing that really stood out to me about your presentation was how you talked about those super parents and the role of parents and caregivers in education for children all around the world. So now we're going to take some time and zoom out a bit to talk more about the intersections of EdTech and girls' education during COVID-19. So I will pass it over now to Dr. Crompton.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Yes, COVID-19 has impacted the whole world, as we know. In fact, I was working with UNESCO at the end of February going into March when we looked at the numbers and presented online that it actually affected 99% of developed countries and 97% in developing. So that's a lot of learners infected. However, we noticed a difference with the girls. Now, my name's Helen Crompton. I'm an associate professor at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, in the US. And I'm also director of the Technology Enhanced Learning Lab, TEL Lab, and the director of the Virtual Reality Lab. So as you can see, my job is great fun. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back one? there was 2 slides similar there, but I really like to point out here the study we're covering today, Inequities in Girls' Learning Opportunities via EdTech, Addressing the Challenge of COVID-19. This was a paper authored and funded by EdTech Hub through the Better Group, chaired by Oxford University, and the people listed below there, the authors, are the people that were directly involved in that research, and that includes Agnes Chigona from South Africa, Cape Peninsula, Katie Jordan from EdTech Hub, and Christina Myers from EdTech Hub. So next. So the questions for our study were, through the use of EdTech during COVID-19, to what extent learning losses were unequally experienced for girls? So it affected globally, but really impacted girls a great deal further than the male counterparts. And what are the factors that contributed to this, in particular for those in low middle income countries? So this paper was a rapid inquiry, and you can flick next. Rapid inquiry of the factors affecting learning loss for girls. And the way we did that, rather than doing an individual study to try and find out what happens, we actually looked globally what was happening through studies that were being published. Now, obviously, it was very fast moving. So we also included, as well as academic literature, we particularly looked at the grey literature of what was just emerging at the time. So you can see there the dots of all those small studies and initiatives that were happening and how they led to a bigger picture of what we're seeing as trends. And on the right there, we do look at aggregated numbers, but this one in particular was looking at a configurative analysis. In other words, looking deep into, okay, what trends are we seeing and what are we getting from that? What's the bigger picture? Next. So from the research side, we were careful in some inter-rater reliability, that we weren't just cherry picking to set a scene, to set a story. So we had on the left there, you can see researchers looking for articles, initiatives that were relevant. Then we looked through an inclusion, exclusion to end up with the final studies that we wanted to use as part of this. Now the findings, and can you click next? The findings from that gathering of all that information were 5 key areas where inequities can be experienced. So digital access, so that's the obvious access to hardware, software, but it also includes what's the age and quality, and did students have to share it, and did they have consistent internet? So it's not just the hardware, software, it's all those other parts that are very relevant as well. Digital freedom. This was the unrestricted choice in using the EdTech. So it might all be there, but could those girls actually have access to use it? In some countries, that was not the case. All the technologies, everything, the digital access was all there, but from fear of the sexual predators and all these incidents that have been happening with girls online, parents did not want their girls to be online, or they would have to be online chaperoned by a parent, usually a mother, who also had multiple other children to look after at the same time, as well as managing perhaps jobs as well. So that was a great issue during COVID, because it wasn't just one girl, it was whole families being back at home. Then digital literacy, autonomy in using the EdTech, that they can actually use it. Digital pedagogies, use of EdTech for effective curriculum delivery, and digital design, are they actually designed for girls to use? And here are some recommendations next. So thinking about digital access, gender disparities were found in a number of girls who had access to certain hardware and in their contingency to equally access EdTech at home. And those potential disparities need to be considered when EdTech interventions are designed, implemented, and evaluated. Next. So social norms and inequities often drive the extent to which girls are given freedom to use and benefit from the EdTech like I described. So girls are often likely, more than boys, to become victims of that online sexual solicitation. Approaches to help serve students and girls while providing access need to be considered. This could include, like on the slide there, policies and initiatives to directly tackle gender violence online to avoid girls being taken away from the online opportunities. Next. Lack of digital literacy can be a major barrier to using and benefiting from EdTech. So we want to make sure girls can use this, and there's various implementations of opportunities for girls to develop those training and online skills to be able to use those interventions. So next. So this is the pedagogies. This is thinking about how to avoid gender bias, discrimination, and misrepresentation, often found in pedagogical practices. So we need to try and avoid those and recognize those disparities and align digital pedagogies with equitable teaching practices and discuss gender discrimination as part of teachers' professional development initiatives. Okay, next. And this is the final one there, digital design. People often forget this, but promoting inclusiveness and equity when designing EdTech interventions to endorse inclusiveness and equity in EdTech design, and think about how to actually get girls engaged. It's not a boys thing, it's a girls and a boys. Okay, next. And we'll try and post these somewhere. If you're interested, the EdTech Hub actually funded all of these, and these are all relevant to this with the girls and other opportunities for you to have a look there about teachers during COVID, and that connects also to girls and also what's happening with students. So there's a few different publications that you might be interested in. Most of those are free to access. Okay, next, and the last quick plug for the mEducation Alliance is that we are doing spotlights on various topics once a month, hosted on the mEducation Alliance website. And the one for this month is actually on girls, so you might want to explore that. We're actually highlighting Nikki, who's in the next slide, the next presenter. So take a look at that, please, and then keep coming back because we'll be also focusing on other crucial topics. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Crompton. And I'm seeing some questions pop up in the chat and the Q&A, so would welcome everyone to continue to add your questions, also your reflections there, and we can keep the conversation going. So last but not least, I will now pass it over to Nicola, who will be talking about the flip side of promoting gender equity, specifically through the role of interactive apps.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you, Helen, for spotlighting my work. It's a real privilege to have my work spotlighted in this community. So I'm going to talk to you today about work that I've been conducting for the past 8 years in collaboration with VSO, the Voluntary Service Overseas, and 1 Billion, who are an EdTech company, non-profit, based in the UK. I'm a full professor at the University of Nottingham. I specialise in child development and education. And I'm going to talk to you today about how interactive apps can mitigate gender differences in early grade maths. And this is a study that was based in Malawi. You can see here one of our children in our studies, a little girl with a handheld tablet, and the tablet delivers the content that's developed by 1 Billion. Usually in a class situation, the child would have headphones attached to the tablet, so that they can work through the materials in a quiet environment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus on maths, but the 1 billion content, their one course app has both literacy and numeracy content. It's a way of delivering child-paced, customized e-learning platform, which provides consistent quality for all children. All children receive the same input, which is really important for equalizing access in terms of high quality education. As long as children can access the tablet, they receive the same level of input. It's a way of delivering well-designed software and content that's grounded in a well-constructed curriculum. And I think the latest version of one course contains over 4,000 learning units that are designed to be highly interactive and engaging and fun for the children to carry out. Each activity within the software has interactive instruction with clear objectives and material that can be repeated on demand. So this enables the software to be personalized in a sense that children who need further instruction can receive it as and when they need to. And they're also given immediate feedback on their responses. So if the response is inaccurate, they have feedback on that. If it's accurate, they get a positive feedback. And you can see here an illustration of the in-app teacher, an avatar that guides the children through the content, and some of the engaging content that's included in the 1 billion material. Next slide, please. So you may have heard of 1 billion's materials. They've been presented at mEducation Alliance Symposium for several years now. It's a multi-award winning software. They won the Tech for Good Awards in Africa. They were co-winners of the Global Learning X Prize, and they've recently just won a WISE Award. We've been looking at the effectiveness of this software in different countries with different cohorts of children for several years now. And we're starting to build an evidence base that shows that the software is effective. And we've shown that over several RCTs. And I've just given you an example below of some of the RCTs conducted in different countries varying in gross national income per capita, that shows between group effect sizes of about 0.33539 to 0.24. So similar to those effect sizes that Victor was talking about in his report. And you can see there that the effect sizes are consistent across countries, regardless of development status, which suggests that this can be very effective in many different countries across the world. Our results show that on average, after using this software for about a 12-week period, you get a 3-month gain in numeracy and a 4-month gain in literacy. So that's just what we're finding on average across our studies. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example of the maths content that I'm going to report on in the next slide. The Masamu app, which is maths in Chichewa, which is the local language of Malawi, covers 28 basic topics. It's designed for Standard 1 and Standard 2 children in Malawian primary schools. It's a progressive curriculum which builds upon knowledge, and the in-app teacher, the avatar, guides children through the content. And they do this through a demonstrate, practice and test procedure that I've illustrated below with one of the examples from the 1 billion software. Next slide, please. What I'm going to report here are gender findings from a specific study, but we have repeated these gender findings in all of our RCTs and the RCTs that have been conducted by other organisations. So the study I'm going to report on took place in Malawi with 14 primary schools, 7 intervention schools and 7 control schools. At the end line, we had a matched sample of 256 children that were assessed at baseline when they were in standard 1 and at end line when they were in standard 2. So it's transitioning that first year of primary school. And in each of the 7 intervention schools, the children received the intervention for between 3 to 6 months. So there was variation between the schools. What our results show here, and I've given you the reference to the paper below, are that girls and boys learn at a similar rate with this EdTech intervention. So in the graph below, you can see the intervention group to the right-hand side of the graph, and you can see that boys and girls are attaining a similar level of attainment in maths at the end of the intervention. However, with conventional schooling, you can see the control group represented on the graph, that boys make faster progress in maths than girls across standard 1 and standard 2. And we've replicated that result in a much larger study with over 1,200 children. What this shows is that as girls and boys progress with the EdTech at a similar rate, but they don't in standard schooling, it shows that if you put this educational technology in at the start of primary school, before gender discrepancies become established, this educational technology can mitigate those gender discrepancies from emerging. It can prevent that drop-off for girls that you're seeing within your conventional schooling system. So, as I said, we've repeated this result of gender. We don't find gender effects in any of the studies that we've conducted using this technology. So it suggests that it has a real propensity to enable girls to reach their full potential. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikki, and thank you to our 3 panelists for such great presentations. This was really informative, and we can now move into a time of Q&A. So I see that some folks have already been inputting their questions in the Q&A function, and our panelists have been so kind as to answer some of those, but I might pull some of those up for additional follow-up later on. But first, I wanted just to talk a bit more about how COVID positively and negatively affected learning and EdTech interventions for girls. And so, Dr. Crompton, I will pose that question to you and ask that you maybe elaborate on that statement a bit more.
Yeah, so COVID, positively or negatively. Well, I covered a lot of the negative side. Well, not necessarily the negative side, but the side that we need to think about, that if we're going online, we have to think about these possibilities of where there could be inequities. There can also be positive signs for girls going online if they struggle to travel because of safety concerns to the school. Being online could help that way. And childcare during COVID, that was difficult, obviously, so there was no traveling. But I would really like to kind of focus on those inequities. A lot of time when we think of inequities, we think digital literacy. But there's so much more. And one of the questions actually earlier was from Judith Baker. She mentioned about languages as well, local languages, which is very, very crucial. I was focused mainly on kind of what's happening with the girls. That will be another very interesting study to look at where languages are being represented or not. But we do need to think about the design, which Judith was going into there. We have to think about how things are designed. And in Nikki's presentation, she showed a program there that was designed to meet the needs of both boys and girls. And in fact, we focus on girls, but there actually can be times as well where there's inequities for boys. So we are in a girls session, but we need to kind of think both ways, and also think in the way that, for example, the digital freedom. We want girls to be online, we want them girls to use EdTech, but yet we also have to consider why those reasons came about. So culturally, what's happening there that girls could be unsafe to just allow them to be on the internet unsupervised. where we might not experience that and we might not see that in those locations. There's a lot of predators looking at girls online. And so it's kind of getting around those things, as well as even cultures of, we studied some and it said girls that use EdTech are bad girls. Girls that have a phone are bad girls. And it's the idea of why are these girls going online while they're using the EdTech? And it's again changing the ideas of what EdTech is about and how it can support girls. So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully I answered the question.
That was great. Thank you, Dr. Crompton. And I think that's a really great point about the biases that girls have to overcome, that maybe they hold about themselves or their parents, teachers, or communities also hold. So along with that, I think that fits in well with what you were talking about in your presentation about digital access. But I would actually like to try to draw those findings to what Nikki and Victor were talking about as well. So maybe we'll go to Victor first, and I'll ask how you think your research intersects with one or more of these 5 areas that Helen covered, whether that's digital access, digital freedom, digital literacy, digital pedagogies, or digital design.
Thanks, Rachel. Definitely a lot of overlap there, a lot of knowledge that could be transferred in both directions. So on access, I think there's a great opportunity to take advantage how mobile penetration rates are just rapidly growing in developing countries. So we can target kids, but we could also target other household members, right, for different programs. But as the Nigeria trial showed, is that older siblings often were helping their younger siblings to use these apps. That said, these apps, and now moving toward design, are centered around our human-centered design apps, so children alone can be learning how to use them. And we saw that through formative research and in our large-scale trial, that it takes a few minutes for a kid to figure out how these apps work. And if they're engaging, they're gamified, then you also increase the motivation for long-term use, both for that targeted child as well as the older siblings, that it's easier for them to help their younger kids, even for themselves, you could argue, to be playing and learning at the same time. In terms of scale, these apps, for example, were designed, they're open source, of course, and they're designed to be as appealing as possible to different cultural settings, right? And of course, that doesn't prevent them from then adapting in a second stage. But I think that development partners need to consider that to reach regional scale, at least, to be investing in interventions that are designed from the get-go in appealing to different countries, regions. So, you can increase the quality, the interactiveness, the gamification of these apps, and then translate. These 2 apps have been translated to over 100 languages together. So I think it's a good example. Some things that are being done well. Thanks.
Thank you, Victor. I will pose the same question to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Rachel. I was taken by the point that Helen made about looking at biases that work in both ways. And our data from our large-scale study looking at literacy and numeracy development in the first year of primary into the second year of primary in Malawi showed that maths gap emerging that I showed you in the smaller scale study as well, that I reported on today. But we also showed the opposite for boys for literacy. So boys and girls come in at a very low level of literacy skill when they enter primary school, but over the first year, girls progress at a faster rate than boys. And our research on the 1 billion software shows that boys and girls, just as with the numeracy software, with their literacy software, they develop at the same rate. So again, this could be a way of mitigating literacy problems that boys experience in the same way as it's mitigating numeracy problems that girls can experience when the normal class teaching tends to promote those differences. Why those differences occur in normal classrooms is needs to be established. But one of the things that Helen was talking about in terms of design, 1 billion go to lengths to make sure that their design, their software is designed to be equally accessible for boys and girls. They have a female avatar, but the content is appealing to both boys and girls. And in their latest version of their software, they also have copies of books that can be accessed digitally to support listening comprehension, and a lot of those books are carefully designed so that they are contextually sensitive, but they're also not gender biased. So their software really is very, very carefully designed to be equal, to provide equal opportunities for girls and boys. One of the other things that Helen talked about, which I've come across on several occasions, especially in the UK actually, when we've been implementing this material here, is a bias from teachers, not necessarily from the children. So I took this into a primary school in Nottingham and showed it to the foundation years teacher, and she said, "Oh, the boys are going to love this." Well, actually, the boys and girls did just as well, and the girls interacted with it just as well and were as motivated to interact with it as the boys were. So, you know, I think there is work to be done on teacher prejudices towards this kind of technology and what boys and girls will like and will respond to, and that perhaps needs to be embedded in teacher training, both pre-service and in service. Thank you.
That's a great point. Thanks, Nikki. I think a lot of research does highlight the role of teachers in addition to parents and caregivers in girls' education. So that is a really great point. I might follow on to one thing you said, Nikki, which is that we've also found in EdTech Hub research, which is that in many cases, girls are more empowered and benefit more from the use of education technology. And from my understanding, the reason why behind this is not always clear, but I was wondering if you could give us your best hypothesis for why we do see greater empowerment on the behalf of girls.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the technology we've been looking at, which is one tablet per child, and the child has the headphones. So they're in their own sort of closed little environment, and the teacher in the software is talking directly to them, and they're getting this reward, and we know that the reward builds their confidence as well. And I'm just wondering whether that very personalized approach perhaps reduces some of the other factors that might be operating in a typical classroom situation, such as the desire to conform, you know, perhaps girls not being as competitive as boys in terms of answering questions, and that potentially, you know, bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, towards asking boys for questions and answers over girls. I think that there are a number of factors that operate in a class environment at both the child level and the teacher level that disadvantage girls compared to boys. And I think that this sort of personalized, self-paced, consistent quality of input is a way of equalizing and overcoming some of those factors that we see operating in standard classrooms.
Yeah, that personalized learning aspect, I think, could definitely be a key factor. So thank you so much. Next, I see we have a question in the Q&A for Dr. Crompton. So I'm wondering if you could speak more about, I think this is about digital access and disparities both at a global level as well as within countries that you've seen in your research?
Yeah, great question. So the study, I do a lot of research generally about EdTech and learning, but for the disparities one, for that particular study that we just presented on today, that was looking globally. However, we wanted to prioritize and make sure we included low and middle income countries. Like, we know that there's less published in academic literature and places like that of developing countries. They focus mainly on the developed countries. So we looked very carefully globally, developed and developing. But if you look at the actual paper, the examples we try to provide most often, about 90%, 85, 90% of the time, was to highlight specific things that were happening in developed countries. So we'll give an example of what's happening with girls and how they're trying to counteract it there. Even just simple things with digital and non-digital technology, such as FM radio, where girls haven't been getting access to the technologies. So there's other opportunities there using FM radio or whatever that can reach a larger audience. So I don't know whether we can post the link again, but hopefully that answered the question that yes, we do include global, but we made sure global did include those low middle income countries very specifically.
Sounds great, and we can be sure to post the link in the chat again. So this has been a great Q&A. I think I will round us out with just one final question to our panelists, which is, if you had one takeaway that you would like each audience member to have from today's session about the role of EdTech in girls' education, what would that be? And first, I will ask Victor to answer that question.
I would say that the importance of combining EdTech with persuasive behavior change communications, right? This could be in the format of edutainment narratives or very likable messengers, like the Tom Hanks of a country, of a region, that strengthens the points of, well, update your social norms. Girl education is fine. Hey, parent, even though you may not know how to read, you can still help your child to learn how to read by using these apps and many other ECD techniques. So the importance of, again, combining persuasive social behavior change communications with EdTech. Thanks.
Thanks, Victor. I will pass over to Dr. Crompton next.
Thank you. So I would take away that there's multiple places where there can be disparities. So the full list, don't just focus on digital literacy. As you try and think of all the things, try and just be cognizant of there's multiple areas, and you take one area and make that happen. That can be negative throughout. So think about everything, not just the one.
Great. These short takeaways, I think, are so fantastic. So now I will pass over to Nikki to round us out.
Don't underestimate girls. With high quality EdTech, they can thrive.
I feel like I have nothing else to say after that. So thank you so much. I wanted to say thank you, Nikki, Victor, Helen, for participating in the session with us. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. I'm going to post a few links in the chat from EdTech Hub, where you can learn more about girls' education and the role of education technology. And hope everyone has a great rest of the symposium, and we encourage you to check out other research hours. I know that there's one happening tomorrow as well. So thank you so much, everyone.